you ever noticed how sports, they tend to bring out extremes in people? It either brings out the best, and you see some great acts of good sportsmanship. I mean, if you've ever been to a professional football game, something that does not get shown on the cameras is every time a player gets injured on the field, there is a group from both teams that gather at center field and take a knee and pray. That doesn't get shown on the cameras, but that's a pretty big display. I mean, that is the best of people being displayed. But at the same time, it can bring out the worst, right? Jumping up and down on a table and throwing cups of beer and jumping over the glass thinking for some reason or another you have a chance against a hockey player who gets paid to fight for a living. I don't think that sports always bring out the worst in people as often as we might think. I just think that these low moments get the publicity and hold our memories better than the best ones. It affects everyone, from players to the fans. Sports can become a family affair. They can be a place for bonding and encouragement. I know for a lot of families, Thanksgiving Day, the family gets around and they may watch the football game, or they may go out and play football and that's the family event, and that's a great thing. But at the same time, sometimes on Thanksgiving, families can gather around the TV and watch football. That may not be a great thing, depending on the family environment, right? But it can also be a place where we somehow feel it's okay for us to let the worst of ourselves be exposed, kind of like driving. Words that wouldn't normally come out of our mouth are okay when they're directed at players on the field or at referees or at the TV or whatever that might be. Have you ever sat back and listened to some people as they're watching the football or the basketball games? Right. Some of them are, well, actually I'd say most, are rather laid back. They sit and watch the game, maybe have a conversation about the game, and that's it. They enjoy the game. But then there are others, there are those few, right? These are the ones we see videos on YouTube about and hear stories about. And they resort to yelling obscenities at their television as if that would make a difference. They throw things, they break things, they cause problems, and we can hear them from down the street. But then, and so you have those sports players who can display some of the greatest camaraderie that we've ever seen. But on the other hand, we have those players who can sink to some of the most disgraceful and unsportsmanlike acts. When I referee ice hockey, which I did yesterday, I get to see a lot of both. And I got to see a lot of both yesterday. Unsportsmanlike and just terrible conduct in front of a bunch of 9-year-old kids. But then a group of coaches who were very polite, disagreed with some of the calls, but were very polite, very nice, and very much a good role model for the kids that they were coaching. You get to see, on the one hand, you see kids who pick up the puck at the end of the shot, at the end of the play, and they hand it to the referee, and then shakes your hand at the end of the game. And then you get others who get scored on, they get mad about a call, and they take the puck and they shoot down the ice, and you have to go chasing after it. And while the puck is on its way, they're yelling at you about all the things they think about your last call. I think as a general rule, the ones that I see display the worst character during games is in fact not the kids, but it's the only other adult involved in the game. It's the coaches. Kids tend to be, for some reason or another, better sports than coaches are, than the adults. It's a little disheartening for obvious reasons, because they're the ones that are supposed to be teaching character and good sportsmanship to the kids, right? Okay. Look at the things that make the news, okay, about bad sportsmanship. And get up a percentage for me of how high are the percentages adults to children. And I think you could probably say that almost 90% of all the things that happen in sports that are newsworthy for the depth of their unsportsmanlike conduct involve adults. Would you say, I mean, coaches or parents doing something really dumb? In hockey, there generally tends to be two kinds of coaches. There are the ones who always roll with the punches, shake your hand at the end of the game, and display good sportsmanship and character no matter how badly I screwed up, right, as a referee. And then there are the ones who can win 8-0, have every call seemingly go their way, and still manage to somehow or another at the end of the game be poor sports and want to chew off your ear. I remember one incident of that last year. It was a young kids, 9 to 10-year-old game, Squirts, and they were playing a rivalry game of sorts. This was a game against a team that they played like 8 times that year. And every game was a 1-goal game. They were close. The game was very good. It went back and forth the whole game. It was a physical game in which these 9 and 10-year-olds pushed to the limit of what they were allowed to do in regards to contact and checking. There's no checking in Squirts. At one point in time during the game, there were 2 very hard body checks delivered by the same team in the same play. Well, as I said, there's no checking. So both penalties were called, and this is in the last 2 minutes of the game. It's a tie game, right? Both penalties are called. The home team goes on a 5-on-3 advantage, right, for the final 2 minutes of the game. They capitalize on it. They scored the game-winning goal, and they won by 1 goal. It was a great game. It was a big win, and it was a time meant for celebrating their much-deserved victory, right? The kids should be excited. The coaches should be encouraging this excitement. But their coach was not celebrating. In fact, he didn't even line up as he was supposed to, because they're supposed to line up at center ice and shake hands after every game. He didn't do it. Rather, he came straight to me to complain. He wanted to complain about the 2 body checks. Mind you, the 2 body checks that penalties were called on. The problem was that his complaint made no sense at all, because there wasn't anything more that could have been done. The penalties were called. They won the game. They were given a 5-on-3. This is one of those coaches who never had anything good to say, and was always prepared to grumble and complain. Before the first puck dropped, he had something bad to say about the referees. It was a little nonsensical. Calls were made in his favor, the game went well, but as with humanity in general, when we give in to the temptation to complain, we seem to lose our ability to think rationally. And we stop thinking through things, and instead we just look for things to complain about, to grumble about. Complaining is completely and totally irrational. All complaining is irrational, and it never accomplishes anything. As we come into the week of Thanksgiving, I think we realize that in our lives we can choose to either live as thankful people, of good character, or we can choose to dwell on the negative and become a complaining people that can't escape from the chains of our own complaints. We see examples of this spread throughout the Bible, as we've been looking, especially, right, as we've been looking at Israel lately in our Sunday morning class. Israel can many times be classified as a people of complaining, right? Or there are times where Israel could be classified as a people of praise. One thing you'll notice, though, is that praise and complaint, they never can occupy the same space. We can never praise and complain at the same time. It's not possible. They dominate each other. In fact, when Israel became emerged and won, they embarked on a pattern of only that one. If they chose that we were going to complain today, you would notice that tomorrow they complained as well. And the day after they complained as well. And the day after that they complained as well. And you'll notice that there wasn't much praise going on during all of that complaining. Because it's not possible. As we've been working through our Sunday morning study in Exodus and the wilderness experience, it's been impossible to miss the sheer magnitude and consistency at which Israel continuously finds itself grumbling and complaining. I'll give you a few examples. In Exodus 6, they grumbled against Moses because of the repercussions of God's beginning of His saving act. In chapter 14, they grumbled because Pharaoh's armies were coming. After the parting of the Red Sea and seeing the plagues and power of God in chapter 15, they decided to complain about water. In chapter 16, they complained about food. In chapter 17, they complained about water again. In chapter 32, they complained about Moses taking too long, and they built an idol to worship. In Numbers chapter 11, they complain about their misfortunes, and then move on to complaining about no meat. In chapter 12, Aaron and Miriam complain about not having more authority. In chapter 13, they complain about the opposition in Canaan. In chapter 14, they rebel against Aaron and Moses. At the end of chapter 14, they complain about the consequences of their own complaining. In chapter 16, they rebel again, and they complain again. In the end of chapter 16, the people complain for the punishment given for the rebellion that they did again. In chapter 17, they complain and challenge Aaron's authority. In chapter 20, again, for the third time, they complain about water. In chapter 21, they complain about having to go the long way around Edom. So, was this a people of praise or a people of complaining? Well, what were they supposed to be? People of praise. But what were they? They were a people of complaining. Worst of all, their complaining is completely irrational and without sense. You might understand the first couple of complaints, right? Because we're learning the process here. We're learning what God does and what He does, who He is, right? But you have to think, once they've seen what their God can do, the 10 plagues, the parting of the Red Sea, all these things, and what He is doing, continuing to do, right? A pillar of fire going before you. You would have to think, how can they continue to complain? The God who brought the 10 plagues on Egypt can't save them from the Egyptian army. The God who parted the Red Sea can't provide them with food and water. The God who drowned the Egyptians and overcame every adversary they came up against can't give them victory over the Canaanites. I think that last one in chapter 20 kind of sums it up. The God who made the bitter water good for drinking, and the God who brought water from a rock. You're going to complain about this God because you can't once again find water? He's already done it twice. What makes you think that He's not going to do it again? Complaining is irrational. It blocks reason. And it's not just a matter of you can't see a reason when you're complaining. Complaining blocks reason. It keeps it out of our minds. It stops the basic process of thinking, and it makes us look pretty foolish. There is no such thing as a justified complaint. They're all useless. Philippians 2:14 tells us, do everything without grumbling or arguing. There are no exclusions there. Complaints have power, but only power to destroy. No power to build or to restore. So again, was Israel meant to be a people of complaining? Obvious answer, no, right? They, like us, were called to be a people of praise. You'll notice in the stories of Exodus and Numbers a lot of grumbling and a lot of regulations about how they were to worship, but a suspicious lack of actual worship itself. Grumbling muffled and silenced their praise and thanksgiving. We can either live with a positive or a negative attitude, but we cannot possess both at the same time. It is not possible. One will always overshadow the other. Now, just because Israel was a people of complaining in Exodus and Numbers does not mean that they were always that way. Now, I do think that if you look at their history, there were more times and a greater amount of time that they were a people of complaining than they were a people of praise. But I do think as we look through their story that there were times where we can qualify, where we could count them as a people of praise. There were brief moments where they began to fulfill their calling to be a people of praise and thanksgiving. One of those was when David was king. Do you think that it's a coincidence that the glory days of Israel just happened to coincide with the time in which they could be seen in the time in which they could be most qualified as a people of praise? Do you think that was a coincidence? It wasn't an accident. And it isn't just a matter of God gave them victory, was it? But which He did. But God gave them joy. God gave them thanksgiving. God gave them praise. And in and of itself, that praise and thanksgiving was an extremely powerful force. If I were to step into a locker room before a game, a hockey game, let's say, one of the greatest indicators of a team, of how the team will perform, is their confidence level and their attitude. If I walk into the locker room and I hear them complaining, okay, we're playing Lysander today. And last time we played Lysander, they cheated so bad. Those referees lost that game for us. And that guy, he slashed me in the back of the leg, and on and on and on. If I walk into the locker room and I hear them complaining about how the last game went, guess how this game's going to go? It's going to go pretty much the same way. They're going to lose. They're going to lose. And if they don't lose, it's not going to be a pretty game. Right? If they're found to be complaining about the way the last game went, you can almost guarantee a loss. But if the attitude is good and the spirits are high, then you almost know that the potential for victory is very, very high. Some people think that winning creates a good attitude and losing creates a bad one. But I believe that it's in fact the attitude that produces the victory or the loss. A coach of decent character and integrity was a coach of decent character and integrity before the game ever started. He didn't become a coach of decent integrity and character after they won the game. He started the season that way. And so the way a coach of bad character and integrity was already won before the game ever started. Winning and losing does not make character, integrity, complaining, or positivity. I think also one thing I've noticed and learned is that those coaches who complain about everything don't have to lose to complain. Winning doesn't create a good attitude. Losing doesn't create a bad attitude. We create one or the other. So it shouldn't be surprising that when you find a man of decent character and integrity in Israel, a man of praise and thanksgiving, that you'll notice victory seems to follow right behind it, doesn't it? We're talking about David, right? Think about the book of Psalms, which almost entirely is a book of praise. Okay, so as we said earlier, praise is thanksgiving. It's a book of thanksgiving. A vast majority of that book was written by one man, David. A man after God's own heart. A man who just happened to be the most successful king in all of Israel's history. Is that a coincidence? The one king who could be described as a man after God's own heart happens to be the most successful king in Israel's history? Turn with me over to Psalm chapter 100. Psalm 100. Recognize the story of David and that everything was not always particularly kosher. He was driven out of his palace by his own son. He lived through 2 civil wars in Israel. Okay. Lost his child and murdered a man and then got called out on it. Okay. And in the midst of even the greatest tragedy, he could write psalms like this. He could find thanksgiving in the midst of losing. Winning does not create a good attitude. Losing does not create a bad attitude. Right? Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come into his presence with singing. Know that the Lord, he is God. It is he who made us, and we are his. We are his people, and the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving, and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him. Bless his name. For the Lord is good. His steadfast love endures forever, and his faithfulness to all generations. Is it just a coincidence that in the midst of such praise stood the most successful generation of Israel in the Old Testament? Praise creates victory. Praise creates change. Thanksgiving generates joy. Do you realize that in the presence of a complaint, that joy can't exist? Try to be happy and complain at the same time, and you'll find that it's probably not possible. When have you ever found yourself to be happy when you're filled with complaints and negativity? Or take it even farther. How often are the people around you able to be happy when you are filled with complaints and negativity? It pulls people down and has the ability to make both us and our loved ones miserable. Just like with Israel, we have had a choice put before us. Will we choose to be a people of praise or a people of complaining? We can only choose one. One creates joy, and the other creates misery. As Thanksgiving approaches, we all know that we are supposed to be thankful, right? We know it's so well that it seems cliche and a little corny to talk about Thanksgiving and being thankful on the Sunday before Thanksgiving. But we have this basic problem. Sometimes it's easier to see what we don't have than to see what we do have. When we get stuck on the don'ts, we'll notice that the complaints aren't far behind. There's a reason why the suicide rate tends to jump as we encounter the holidays. Because we forget what we have, and we end up only seeing the lack. We have a great blessing in our God. Yes, our blessings may have been marred by the sin of this world, by the imperfections of life, but that doesn't make them any less a blessing. No matter where a child is, no matter how poorly they may act or how great they might act, a child will always be a blessing. No matter how well or poorly our family interacts with one another, the fact of the matter is you've got one that you're talking to. No matter how bad the food is, no matter how much I burnt the turkey, we're still all seated together around the table. Above all, we must remember that no matter what place we find ourselves in life, God has already done this before, just like the water. How many times did God give water to the Israelites? And how many times did they complain about it? Okay. How many times has the exact problem that you are encountering today, God has already dealt with and fixed and worked through? Right? We're not going through anything new. God has been there before, and He's made it well before. Who's to say He's not going to do it again? He has redeemed countless situations exactly like yours. He has made a career of bringing joy to the joyless and comfort to the distraught. Just like with the Israelites, He has made drinking water twice before. Of course, He's able to do it again. So as well, God has saved, redeemed, loved, brought joy, peace, and comfort. How many times before? Well, I don't have enough fingers and toes. We don't have enough in here. We don't have enough sand, right? Just too many times. As long as we choose to be a people of complaining, we must realize that we will also choose to be a people who blocks and covers the joy of the Lord. Only a people of praise can experience fully the blessing of God and therefore experience true thanksgiving. So let's today, as we go out, determine that we will be a people of praise.